Hello, dear Polymer Clay enthusiast. I'm Mihaela from Learn Polymer Clay, and in today's tutorial I am going to continue with the Faux Dichroic inspiration, and this is because you will always end up with very beautiful beads when using this technique, and you will end up with festive looking, mesmerizing, colorful beads. In order to make such beautiful colorful beads, we are going to use black polymer clay again for the contrast between the very colorful and shining nail art foil transfers. So I have prepared several pieces of black polymer clay that I passed through the setting number 3 of my Atlas pasta machine. And then I've used a very beautiful stamp with a Baroque pattern, or something that I consider to be Baroque. And then I'm going to use again nail art foils, and I have to tell you that not all of them would transfer to polymer clay. So in order to transfer nail art foils into polymer clay, I'm just putting the piece, the foil on top of the clay, and then I'm using my fingers to burnish it into the clay, and I would insist on burnishing the foil, and then I would lift up a little corner and I would verify, I would see if I've got the transfer right. When you are happy with the look of the transfer, you'll just have to lift the foil, the transparent foil off. I've used the same stamp with the same Baroque pattern to impress a pattern. So if you impress a pattern into this clay textured with polymer clay, you get the effect of clay textured. But if you use ink, and I'm using StazOn black ink, in fact the ink will not color the foil. It will in fact lift off the foil in the recessed areas, so you'll still have foil on the embossed part, but you will see, because you'll have to clean your stamp afterwards, you will see that the foils in the recessed areas have transferred to or got stuck to the stamp, and I just use baby wipes to clean the stamp. And if I notice that there are tiny areas where I cannot reach with the baby wipes, I have an old toothbrush that I use to clean difficult areas like that. So now it's time to use the piece that we have prepared. So again, I'm passing some black polymer clays for the pasta machine through the setting number 3 of my Atlas pasta machine. Then I use the same stamp to impress a texture, and this is going to be the back of the piece. Then I put the clay sheet with the transfer on top. And then I decided to use as pattern for cutting the shape of the bead, because I don't have cutters this size, and I didn't want to cut freehand, because I was afraid I would end up with a very little piece, because I would have to cut and continue cutting, because I might not like the shape. So I have this bottle of shampoo, and it has a very interesting shape. The cover, it has a very interesting shape. So I thought this would be the size and the shape that I would like for this piece. Then I decided to use the flexible blade and trim a little bit of the piece. And I will stick with this shape and size. I am not going to cut anymore. So I will do this technique again. I am going to decorate another piece of polymer clay with nail art foils. And as you can see, these kind of nail art foils, they transfer easily to polymer clay. So again, I'm using the stamp and StazOn black ink to make a beautiful pattern on the piece, but in the same time, um, I am lifting up, I am creating, let's say, a black pattern in the finished bead. So if you, when you look at the finished beads, you will notice that you have a Baroque black pattern inside this very colorful area. And as I said, if you just use the stamp and press it into the clay, it will just texture the clay, but you won't have this contrast between the raised area with the foil on top and the recessed areas that are black polymer clay, of course. So after texturing the transferred the polymer clay with the transfers on top, I cut it in half. Then again, I prepared a textured piece for the back. I applied on it half of the polymer clay sheet with the transfers and the embossed pattern, and I will apply on the other side half uh, of another piece of black polymer clay textured with the same stamp. So I'm creating these contrasting areas, left, right. And this time, after placing all the pieces together and using parchment paper to press them into each other and have a very good connection, I am going to use petal shaped cutters. Then I baked the clay for 45 minutes at the recommended temperature. I let the clay cool down and then I applied a rather thin layer of UV resin. And I decided to pass the brush on the margins because you will notice after curing the resin that part covered with resin is a very beautiful black, has a very beautiful black, intense black color, but the margins will just have the color of baked polymer clay, which is rather matte and not so intense. So in order to have beautiful margins for the pieces, you could either put resin on the margins using a brush, but you'll have to use a pocket UV lamp and cure the margins as well. Don't forget to do this. Or if you don't want to do this curing process for the margins, sometimes I use black acrylic paint and I just color these margins with black acrylic paint, but I want to have the same intense black color for the front and for the margins. I applied a coat of UV resin and I used the brush to spread the resin out. I'm trying not to put too much because I don't want to have drippings. I'm putting my pieces on cutters that I almost never use, so in case I have drippings and I don't risk to damage my best cutters anyway. And if you decide to add resin on the margins, I recommend you to do this part first and then apply resin on top of the piece, because when moving the piece you might tilt the piece and you would end up with resin on the back of the piece. So as a piece of advice, do this part first and then put the resin on top of the piece. You could cure the resin for 2 minutes and add another layer and cure it again, but I didn't consider that it was necessary for these pieces. I consider them to be beautiful as they are. Do check the beads from the side to make sure that you don't have gaps where you would need to add a little bit more resin. Make sure you don't have drippings, because it's better to use baby wipes and clean them now. You could pass a heat gun on top of the pieces and remove any air bubbles, and then you just have to cure your pieces for about 7 minutes. And these are the finished pieces, and I hope that you like this idea for faux Baroque beads that have so much potential, that are very mesmerizing, and I personally like them very much. Thank you for watching the tutorial, and stay tuned for more inspiration for your work with polymer clay.